In a small, quiet village surrounded by lush green hills and thick forests, life moved at its own gentle pace. The villagers were simple people who lived off the land, tending to their farms, raising livestock, and sharing stories around crackling fires on cool evenings. But beneath this peaceful exterior, there was an air of mystery that clung to the place like morning dew. It wasn't just the dense woods or the winding rivers. It was the old traditions, passed down through generations, that gave the village its unique character. Some of these customs brought people together while others kept them apart. One such tradition revolved around death and what came after. According to ancient beliefs, when someone died under tragic circumstances, their spirit lingered near their final resting place for 3 days. During this time, it was said that the soul could influence the living world one last time before moving on. For most deaths, this meant lighting candles, leaving offerings, and praying for safe passage. But if the deceased left behind a newborn child, the rules changed drastically. In such cases, the baby would be placed on the grave of the departed parent, untouched and unattended, for 3 full days. This practice was rooted in superstition. People believed that during those 72 hours, the parent's spirit would decide whether to guide the child into the afterlife or return them to the world of the living. Any interference from the living risked angering the spirits, bringing misfortune upon the entire community. Elena, a young woman beloved by all, had been one of the brightest lights in the village. Her laughter echoed through the fields as she worked alongside her neighbors, and her kindness knew no bounds. She always made time to help those in need, whether it was mending clothes for the elderly or teaching children how to weave baskets from reeds. Everyone admired her strength and warmth, but few knew the struggles she faced in private. Elena had recently become pregnant, and though she tried to hide it, worry lines creased her forehead as her due date approached. The nearest hospital was miles away, accessible only by a bumpy dirt road that turned treacherous during rains. With limited resources and outdated equipment, the local clinic struggled to handle even minor emergencies, let alone childbirth complications. When labor pains began, Elena hesitated to seek help. She trusted the midwives in the village, women who had delivered countless babies over the years. But fate had other plans. Complications arose quickly, and despite the frantic efforts of the midwives and the handful of villagers who rushed to assist, Elena succumbed to blood loss. Her son, however, survived, born frail but alive. As the news spread, shockwaves rippled through the community. No one could believe that someone so vibrant and full of life had been taken so suddenly. Bound by tradition, the villagers did what they thought was right. They wrapped the tiny infant in a thin blanket and laid him gently on his mother's freshly dug grave beneath an ancient oak tree. Its gnarled branches stretched toward the sky, casting long shadows across the ground. The baby wailed softly, his cries piercing the stillness of the evening. Yet no one dared to comfort him. Fear gripped the hearts of even the bravest among them. To intervene now would mean defying centuries-old customs, risking not only their own safety, but also the well-being of the entire village. So they stood, back, watching silently as dusk fell and darkness enveloped the graveyard. Clara, Elena's younger sister, remained blissfully unaware of the tragedy unfolding in their hometown. She lived far away in the bustling city, where life was fast-paced and demanding. Work consumed her days, leaving little room for reflection. Clara and Elena hadn't spoken in months, their relationship strained by a heated argument over family inheritance. Words had been exchanged, harsh and unforgiving, and since then silence had settled between them. Though Clara often thought about reaching out, pride held her back. Now, as fate would have it, she remained oblivious to the fact that her sister was gone, and that her newborn nephew lay alone on Elena's grave fighting for survival. The first night passed slowly. The baby's cries grew weaker, blending with the rustling leaves and distant hoots of owls. Animals prowled nearby, drawn by the scent of vulnerability, yet something inexplicable kept them at bay. Villagers whispered among themselves, torn between compassion and fear. An elderly woman named Marta, known for her wisdom and knowledge of herbal remedies, watched from her window, her heart heavy with conflicting emotions. She remembered losing her own child many years ago and how powerless she had felt. Yet tradition weighed heavily on her shoulders, binding her to inaction. As dawn broke, the baby's cries became fainter still. His tiny body shivered against the cold gravestone, his lips turning blue. Still, no one stepped forward. The second day stretched endlessly, marked by rain that poured relentlessly, drenching the fragile bundle. By nightfall, the infant lay, motionless, his strength nearly depleted. Inside their homes, the villagers wrestled with guilt and doubt. Was this really the right thing to do? Or were they simply too afraid to act, and so the story unfolded, a tale of love, loss, and the haunting power of tradition. Underneath the ancient oak tree, the baby clung to life, his fate hanging precariously, in the balance. Little did anyone know, the events of the next few days would change the village forever, forcing its people to confront their deepest fears and rediscover the true meaning of humanity. The second day began with a heavy gray sky that seemed to press down on the village like an invisible weight. The air was thick with moisture, and the ground was damp from the previous night's rain. In the graveyard, beneath the sprawling branches of the ancient oak tree, the baby lay motionless on his mother's grave. His cries had grown weaker overnight, almost blending into the hum of nature. The rustling leaves, the chirping crickets, and the distant hoots of owls. To anyone passing by, it might have seemed as though the child had already succumbed to the elements. Yet every so often, a faint whimper escaped his lips, a desperate reminder that he was still clinging to life. Villagers went about their morning routines, stealing glances toward the graveyard but avoiding it altogether. Some muttered prayers, under their breath, while others hurried past with their heads bowed, unable or unwilling to face the reality of what was happening. Fear gripped their hearts, not just fear for the child, but fear of the unknown consequences if they dared to intervene. Generations of stories about vengeful spirits and cursed families had been passed down in whispers, shaping their beliefs and dictating their actions. It is tradition, they told themselves, repeating the phrase like a mantra to silence their guilt. But deep inside, doubts lingered. Was this truly the right thing to do, or were they simply too afraid to act? An elderly woman named Marta watched the scene unfold from her small cottage at the edge of the village. Her home was modest, with wooden walls weathered by time and a thatched roof patched with straw. From her window she could see the graveyard and the silhouette of the oak tree against the pale morning light. Marta's hands trembled as she knitted a scarf, her mind racing with memories of her own loss. Decades ago, she had lost her only child, a little girl who had died before her third birthday. Back then, there had been no rituals or ceremonies to guide her grief, only silence and emptiness. Now, as she watched the baby struggle for survival, those old wounds reopened, raw and painful. Marta wrestled with her conscience throughout the morning. She knew the risks of defying tradition, how one misstep could invite disaster upon the entire community, but she also couldn't ignore the humanity staring her in the face. How could they leave an innocent child to die like this? Wasn't life precious enough to warrant breaking old rules? These questions swirled in her mind, keeping her rooted to her chair even as the hours ticked by. Finally, unable to bear the weight of her thoughts any longer, she stood up and walked to the door. For a moment it seemed as though she might step outside and do something, anything to help the child. But then she hesitated, frozen by fear. What if she angered the spirits? What if her actions brought calamity upon the village? With a sigh, she closed the door and returned to her knitting, her hands trembling more than ever. As the day wore on, the weather worsened. Dark clouds gathered overhead, and soon, rain began to fall again, heavier this time. The drops pelted the earth, turning the soil into mud and soaking everything in sight. Beneath the oak tree, the baby's blanket grew sodden, offering little protection against the cold. His tiny body shivered uncontrollably, his strength fading with each passing hour. The once faint whimpers became almost inaudible, drowned out by the relentless patter of rain. Animals prowled nearby, drawn by instinct to the scent of vulnerability. A fox crept close, its eyes gleaming in the dim light. But something inexplicable stopped it from approaching further. It sniffed the air, circled cautiously, and then retreated into the shadows, as if repelled by an unseen force. Inside their homes, villagers tried to distract themselves from the haunting sounds coming from the graveyard. They busied themselves with chores, cooking meals, and tending to their livestock. Yet no matter how hard they tried, the image of the abandoned baby lingered in their minds. Children asked questions their parents couldn't answer. Why is the baby crying? Why doesn't someone help him? Adults shushed them quickly, unwilling to explain the complexities of tradition to young ears. Some mothers hugged their own children tighter, tears streaming down their faces as they imagined what it must feel like to lose a child and to leave another behind. By late afternoon, the rain showed no signs of stopping. The village streets were deserted, save for a few brave souls who ventured out briefly to check on their animals or fetch water. One such person was Gabriel, a traveler who had arrived in the village the previous evening. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor. Unlike the villagers, he had no ties to their traditions or superstitions. In fact, he had never heard of the custom of leaving newborns on graves. When he first saw the baby lying alone in the graveyard, his heart sank. At first glance, he thought, the child was part of some elaborate ceremony, perhaps a symbolic gesture meant to honor the dead. But when he realized the infant was real and very much alive, his blood ran cold. Gabriel approached cautiously, his boots squelching in the mud. He knelt beside the baby, shielding him from the rain with his coat. The child's skin was icy to the touch, and his breathing was shallow, but he was still alive. Gabriel's instincts kicked in immediately. Without hesitation, he scooped the baby into his arms and rushed toward the nearest house. Along the way, he called out to anyone he saw, pleading for help. "Please," he shouted, his voice hoarse with urgency. "This child needs warmth and care. Someone please help me." His cries drew attention, and soon a small crowd gathered around him. Among them was Marta, who emerged from her cottage, her knitting needles clutched tightly in her hands. She recognized Gabriel's desperation and felt a pang of shame. Here was a stranger, unburdened by their customs, willing to risk everything to save a life. Could she really stand by and do nothing? Summoning all her courage, she stepped forward and offered her assistance. "Bring him inside," she said softly, leading Gabriel to her home. "We'll warm him and feed him. We can't let him die." Once inside, Marta worked quickly, using her knowledge of herbal remedies to revive the baby. She brewed a warm mixture of goat's milk and honey, carefully feeding it to the child drop by drop. Gabriel held the baby close, wrapping him in dry blankets and rubbing his back gently to stimulate his breathing. Slowly, the infant began to respond. His lips regained a hint of color, and his tiny chest rose and fell more steadily. Relief washed over both Marta and Gabriel, though their joy was tempered by the gravity of what had just happened. They had saved the child, yes, but at what cost? Would the villagers turn against them for defying tradition? Only time would tell. News of the rescue spread quickly through the village, sparking a mix of emotions among the residents. Some expressed gratitude, marveling at the bravery of the stranger who had intervened. Others were angry, accusing Gabriel and Marta of meddling with forces beyond their understanding. Arguments erupted in the streets, voices rising in heated debates about tradition versus compassion. Meanwhile, the baby slept soundly in Marta's arms, blissfully unaware of the storm raging around him. For now he was safe, but the battle for his future was far from over. By the third day, the village was abuzz with whispers and tension. The baby's rescue had ignited a firestorm of emotions, dividing the community into two camps: those who believed Marta and Gabriel had done the right thing by saving the child, and those who saw their actions as reckless defiance of sacred traditions. The air felt heavy, not just from the lingering rain, but also from the weight of unspoken fears and simmering resentment. Conversations buzzed in hushed tones at the market, around kitchen tables, and even in the fields where farmers paused mid-harvest to argue over what should happen next. Marta's cottage became the center of attention. a modest home that now held within its walls both hope and controversy. Inside, the baby lay swaddled in clean blankets near the hearth, his tiny chest rising and falling steadily. His color had improved dramatically since the night before, thanks to Marta's careful nursing and Gabriel's relentless determination. Though still fragile, he showed signs of strength, cooing softly and occasionally twitching his fingers as if reaching out for something unseen. Marta sat beside him, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically as she tried to focus on her work. But her mind kept drifting back to the events of the past 2 days. The cries of the baby, the cold stares of the villagers, and the guilt that gnawed at her conscience like an open wound. Gabriel, too, couldn't shake off the unease that lingered in the air. He wasn't a man who sought conflict or drama. He simply followed his instincts, which told him that leaving a helpless infant to die was wrong. Yet as he wandered through the village, he noticed the way people avoided meeting his gaze or hurried away when they saw him coming. Some muttered under their breath about outsiders, meddling in matters they didn't understand. Others crossed themselves or whispered prayers, convinced that breaking tradition would bring misfortune upon them all. Despite this hostility, Gabriel refused to regret his decision. Every time he looked at the baby, so small yet resilient, he knew he'd made the right choice. Word of the baby's survival reached Clara, Elena's estranged sister, 2 weeks after the incident. She lived miles away in the city, where life moved fast and distractions were plenty. Work consumed most of her days, leaving little room for reflection or reconciliation. Since their argument months ago, Clara had buried herself in her job, using it as a shield against the guilt that tugged at her whenever she thought of Elena. Their fight had been ugly, filled with harsh words neither of them truly meant. But pride had kept them apart, and now as Clara read the letter informing her of Elena's death and the miraculous survival of her newborn son, waves of grief and shame crashed over her. Clara immediately booked a train ticket to the village, her heart pounding with a mix of emotions, sorrow for losing her sister, anger at the villagers for abandoning the child, and a fierce determination to uncover the truth. The journey felt endless, each mile stretching longer than the last as her mind raced with questions. What kind of place would she find? Would the villagers welcome her or turn her away like they had Gabriel? And most importantly, how could she possibly step into the role of guardian for a child she barely knew? When Clara finally arrived, the sight of the village struck her deeply. It was smaller than she remembered, quieter somehow, as if holding its breath. The once familiar faces of her childhood now seemed distant, wary. As she walked toward Marta's cottage, guided by directions from a reluctant villager, she felt the weight of countless eyes following her every move. When she reached the door, Marta greeted her with a mixture of apprehension and relief. "You're here," the old woman said softly, stepping aside to let Clara in. Inside, Clara froze at the sight of the baby sleeping peacefully by the fire. He looked so much like Elena, his delicate features, the curve of his nose, the faint dimple on his chin. Tears welled up in Clara's eyes as memories flooded back. Elena laughing as they played in the fields as children. Elena braiding flowers into her hair during summer festivals. Elena standing firm during their final, bitter argument. Guilt twisted in Clara's stomach like a knife. If only she hadn't let pride get in the way. If only she had called, visited, made amends sooner. Now, all she had left was this tiny piece of Elena, entrusted to her care. Determined to learn everything, Clara turned to Marta and asked for the full story. The old woman hesitated at first, unsure of how much to reveal, but eventually, she recounted the events leading up to the rescue. The crying baby on the grave, the rain-soaked nights, the animals prowling nearby, and finally, Gabriel's arrival. Hearing it all unfold left Clara stunned. How could anyone leave a child to die like that? Didn't they realize they were sentencing an innocent life to the same fate as its mother? Her anger boiled over, and she confronted several villagers later that evening. Standing in the center of the square, she demanded answers, her voice trembling with emotion. "How could you stand by and do nothing?" she cried. "That baby is my nephew, my family, and you treated him like some kind of offering." Her words cut through the crowd like a blade, silencing the murmurs and forcing everyone to confront the reality of what had happened. Some looked ashamed, heads bowed and hands wringing nervously. Others remained defiant, muttering about tradition and the will of the spirits. But Clara wasn't finished. She reminded them of Elena, their vibrant, kind-hearted neighbor who had always been there for them. Did they really think she would want her son abandoned like this? Wasn't it possible that her spirit had guided Gabriel to save the baby? For the first time, cracks began to form in the villagers' rigid beliefs. Perhaps they had misunderstood the purpose of the ritual. Perhaps compassion was never meant to be sacrificed at the altar of fear. As the days passed, Clara decided to stay in the village to raise the baby, whom she named Elias, a name meaning God has answered. It was fitting, she thought, given the circumstances. With Gabriel's help, she secured legal guardianship, though not without resistance from certain quarters. Some villagers argued that the child belonged to the land where his mother rested, insisting that removing him would upset the balance of things. But Clara stood firm, refusing to back down. She sold her apartment in the city and moved back permanently, determined to honor Elena's memory by giving Elias the love and stability he deserved. Elias thrived under Clara's care. Though he was still small and fragile, his spirit burned brightly. He smiled often, his gurgles filling the cottage with warmth and light. Marta grew fond of him quickly, treating him like a grandson and teaching Clara how to care for him using traditional remedies and wisdom passed down through generations. Gabriel, too, formed a close bond with the boy, visiting frequently and helping Clara adjust to life in the village. Together, they created a makeshift family, united by shared grief and a newfound sense of purpose. Yet, even as peace settled over Marta's cottage, shadows lingered elsewhere. Strange occurrences plagued the village, whispers carried by the wind, fleeting figures seen near Elena's grave, and dreams of a woman singing lullabies. Many believed Elena's spirit still watched over her son, ensuring his safety and guiding those who cared for him. These signs brought comfort to some, while others remained uneasy, unable to fully reconcile the past with the present. For Clara, however, these mysteries only strengthened her resolve. She vowed to protect Elias no matter what, honoring her sister's legacy by raising him with love, kindness, and courage. And though the road ahead promised challenges, she faced it head-on, knowing that sometimes the hardest choices are the ones that lead to redemption, for oneself, for others, and for the future generations waiting to inherit the world. The days following Clara's arrival in the village were a whirlwind of emotions, decisions, and confrontations. Her presence brought a sense of urgency to the community, forcing everyone, whether they liked it or not, to reckon with the consequences of their actions. The villagers, who had once been bound by tradition and fear, now found themselves divided. Some admired Clara's courage and determination, seeing her as a beacon of hope and change. Others resented her interference, convinced that her defiance of age-old customs would bring misfortune upon them all. Tension simmered just beneath the surface, threatening to boil over at any moment. Clara wasted no time settling into her new role as Elias's guardian. She moved into Marta's cottage temporarily, sharing the cozy space with the elderly woman and the baby. Though the arrangement was far from ideal, it allowed Clara to focus on caring for Elias while also building a support system. Marta proved invaluable, teaching Clara everything she knew about raising infants, from preparing herbal teas to soothe colic to crafting soft blankets from wool spun by hand. Gabriel, too, became an integral part of their makeshift family. He visited daily, helping with chores around the house, running errands in the village, and offering words of encouragement when Clara felt overwhelmed. Despite the warmth and camaraderie within the cottage, life outside its walls remained fraught with challenges. Rumors spread like wildfire among the villagers, fueled by those who opposed Clara's decision to take custody of Elias. Some claimed the child was cursed, destined to suffer because he had survived what was meant to be his final resting place. Others whispered that Elena's spirit was restless, angered by the disruption of tradition and seeking revenge. These stories took root quickly, sowing seeds of doubt and fear in the minds of even the most open-minded residents. One evening, as dusk settled over the village, Clara decided to confront the naysayers directly. She stood in the center of the square, holding Elias close to her chest. His tiny face peeked out from the folds of a soft blanket, his wide eyes curious but unafraid. Clara's voice rang out clear and steady, cutting through the murmurs of the gathered crowd. "I understand your fears," she began, her tone firm yet compassionate. "But I want you to look at this child, not as some symbol of bad luck or broken tradition, but as a human being. A baby who deserves love, care, and a chance at life." Her words struck a chord with many, especially the younger generation, who had grown up hearing tales of rituals but hadn't fully embraced them. They saw Elias for what he truly was, an innocent child caught in the crossfire of superstition and humanity. Slowly, a few people stepped forward, offering hesitant smiles and quiet words of support. One young mother approached Clara, handing her a handmade toy carved from wood. "For the little one," she said softly, before retreating into the crowd. It was a small gesture, but it carried immense weight, a sign that change, however slow, was possible. Not everyone was swayed, however. An older man named Jonas, a staunch believer in tradition, voiced his disapproval loudly and often. He argued that leaving Elias on Elena's grave had been the right thing to do, claiming that interfering with fate upset the natural order of things. "You think you're saving him," Jonas snapped during one particularly heated exchange, "but you're only delaying the inevitable. Mark my words, bad luck will follow this child wherever he goes." His words sent shivers down the spines of some listeners, but Clara refused to back down. "You call it bad luck," Clara shot back, her voice trembling with emotion. "I call it survival. My sister gave her life bringing this boy into the world, and I won't let her sacrifice be in vain. If there are consequences for doing the right thing, then so be it. I'll face them head on, for her, and for him." Her conviction silenced Jonas, though it didn't erase his doubts. Still, Clara's unwavering stance earned her respect from many, including those who had initially doubted her intentions. Over time, more villagers began to rally behind her, inspired by her courage and reminded of Elena's kindness. They remembered how she had always gone out of her way to help others, never asking for anything in return. Perhaps, they reasoned, protecting her son was the best way to honor her memory. As weeks turned into months, Clara worked tirelessly to rebuild trust within the community. She organized gatherings in the village square, inviting everyone to share meals, stories, and laughter. At first, attendance was sparse, with only a handful of brave souls willing to participate. But gradually, more people joined in, drawn by the promise of connection and healing. During these events, Clara made a point of talking openly about forgiveness, not just for others but for oneself. She spoke of her own guilt for estranging herself from Elena, admitting that their argument had haunted her long before her sister's death. Her vulnerability resonated deeply with the villagers, many of whom carried regrets of their own. Gabriel played a crucial role in bridging the gap between Clara and the skeptical villagers. As an outsider, he had no vested interest in upholding traditions, which allowed him to approach the situation with fresh eyes. He listened patiently to both sides, offering thoughtful insights and gentle reminders of what truly mattered: compassion, unity, and the future of the village. His calm demeanor and genuine concern earned him allies among even the staunchest traditionalists, paving the way for meaningful dialogue. Elias, meanwhile, continued to thrive under Clara's care. By the time he was 6 months old, he had grown, stronger and more alert, delighting everyone with his infectious giggles and curious nature. He loved to grasp at strands of Clara's hair, pull at Marta's knitting needles, and kick his legs whenever Gabriel held him aloft, pretending to fly like a bird. Each milestone, the first smile, the first laugh, the first attempt at rolling over, was celebrated as a victory not just for Clara, but for the entire village. Slowly but surely, Elias became a symbol of hope, proof that love and resilience could overcome even the darkest moments. Yet shadows still lingered at the edges of the village, reminders of the past that couldn't be erased. Strange occurrences continued to unsettle some residents. Whispers echoed through the graveyard late at night, carried by the wind. Animals avoided the area near Elena's grave, as if sensing something otherworldly. And dreams plagued Marta. Vivid visions of Elena standing beneath the ancient oak tree, cradling Elias in her arms and singing lullabies. In these dreams, Elena's expression was neither angry nor sad. It was peaceful, almost content. When Marta shared her experiences with Clara, the two women sat quietly for a long time, pondering the meaning behind them. "Do you think she's watching over him?" Clara asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Marta nodded slowly, her weathered hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I believe she is," she replied. "And I think she approves of what you're doing. You've given her son a second chance at life, and that's something worth fighting for." Clara felt a lump rise in her throat, tears welling up in her eyes. For so long, she had carried the weight of her guilt, believing she would never deserve redemption. But now, surrounded by the people who had come to love and support her, she began to see a glimmer of light. Perhaps forgiveness wasn't just about absolving others, it was also about letting go of the pain we carry within ourselves. With each passing day, the village transformed. The rifts that had once divided its residents began to heal, replaced by bonds forged through shared struggles and triumphs. Tradition still held sway in many aspects of life, but it no longer dictated every decision. Instead, the villagers learned to balance their heritage with humanity, finding strength in both. And at the heart of it all was Elias, a reminder that, even in the face of tragedy, love and hope could prevail. Though challenges lay ahead, Clara faced them with renewed determination. She had lost her sister, yes, but in doing so, she had gained a son, a purpose, and a community united in its quest for a brighter future. Together, they would build a legacy of compassion, one that honored Elena's memory and ensured Elias grew up surrounded by love. Years passed, and the village that had once been steeped in rigid traditions began to transform in subtle yet profound ways. The changes weren't immediate or dramatic. There were no grand declarations or sweeping reforms, but rather a slow, steady shift in how people thought and interacted with one another. At the heart of this transformation was Elias, now a bright and curious toddler who seemed to light up every room he entered. His laughter echoed through the streets, his tiny hands reached for flowers in the fields, and his endless questions kept everyone on their toes. To Clara, he was more than just her nephew. He was a living testament to the power of love, forgiveness, and resilience. Clara herself had grown immensely since moving back to the village. She had traded her fast-paced city life for something quieter but far richer. Each morning, she woke early to tend to Elias, feeding him breakfast, dressing him in clothes sewn by Marta, and taking him outside to explore the world. Together, they walked along the winding paths between the hills, stopping to watch birds take flight or listen to the babbling brook that ran through the village. These moments became sacred to Clara, filling her with a sense of peace she hadn't known before. Marta remained a constant presence in their lives, acting as both grandmother and mentor. Her wisdom guided Clara not only in raising Elias, but also in navigating the complexities of village life. Marta taught Clara about the rhythms of nature, the best times to plant crops, when to harvest herbs, and how to read the signs of changing seasons. In return, Clara brought new energy to the village, organizing gatherings where stories were shared, songs were sung, and old wounds began to heal. Through these efforts, she helped bridge the gap between generations, encouraging younger villagers to learn from their elders while also embracing fresh ideas. Gabriel, too, stayed close, becoming an unofficial uncle to Elias. Though he still traveled occasionally, he always returned to the village, drawn by the deep connections he had formed. There, he built a small workshop near Marta's cottage, where he crafted furniture and toys using wood from the surrounding forest. Many of these creations found their way into Elias's eager hands. A wooden horse, a spinning top, a miniature boat that floated beautifully in the stream. Gabriel's presence was a source of stability and joy, not just for Elias, but for Clara as well. Their friendship had blossomed into something deeper, though neither of them spoke of it openly. For now, they focused on building a future together, one rooted in kindness and shared purpose. Elias grew into a spirited child, full of wonder and mischief. He loved exploring the graveyard beneath the ancient oak tree, often dragging Clara or Gabriel along with him. "Why does Mama sleep here?" he asked one day, pointing to Elena's grave. Clara knelt beside him, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Because this is where we say goodbye to people we love," she explained gently. "But your Mama isn't really here anymore. She's in our hearts, and in everything good and beautiful around us." Though Elias didn't fully understand, he nodded solemnly, placing a handful of wildflowers on the grave. It was a ritual he repeated often, adding his own touch of innocence and devotion. Over time, other villagers joined in, leaving offerings of their own, fresh fruit, handmade trinkets, or simply heartfelt prayers. What had once been a place of fear and superstition transformed into a site of remembrance and unity, thanks in large part to Elias's unwavering affection for his mother's memory. Despite the progress, echoes of the past lingered. Strange occurrences continued to unsettle some residents, though they became less frequent over time. Whispers carried by the wind, fleeting shadows near the graveyard, and vivid dreams of Elena singing lullabies persisted, reminding everyone of the delicate balance between tradition and change. Yet instead of viewing these phenomena as omens of doom, many came to see them as signs of guidance, from Elena's spirit watching over her son, ensuring his safety and happiness. One particularly memorable incident occurred when Elias turned 5. By then he was a lively boy with boundless curiosity and a knack for getting into trouble. On a crisp autumn afternoon, he wandered farther than usual, chasing butterflies until he reached the edge of the forest. When Clara realized he was missing, panic set in. She called out his name, her voice trembling with fear, while Gabriel and several villagers fanned out to search for him. Hours passed, and just as darkness began to fall, Elias reappeared, unharmed and clutching a small wooden carving of an owl. "I found it," he exclaimed excitedly, holding up the figure. "It was waiting for me under the big tree." The villagers exchanged uneasy glances, recognizing the description of the ancient oak. Some murmured about spirits leading the child astray, while others dismissed it as mere coincidence. But Clara noticed something different about the carving. It bore intricate details that none of the local craftsmen could replicate. That night, as she tucked Elias into bed, she couldn't shake the feeling that Elena's presence had played a role in bringing him home safely. As Elias grew older, so did the village. New families moved in, drawn by its growing reputation as a place of warmth and community. Young couples married, babies were born, and festivals celebrated with renewed enthusiasm. Clara worked tirelessly to preserve the balance between honoring the past and embracing the future. She encouraged children to ask questions, to challenge outdated beliefs, and to find meaning in rituals without being bound by them. Under her influence, the annual Harvest Festival evolved to include storytelling sessions, where elders recounted tales of resilience and courage, alongside traditional songs and dances. Through it all, Elias thrived. He developed a keen interest in plants and animals, spending hours observing insects, identifying bird calls, and planting seeds in the garden behind Marta's cottage. Gabriel nurtured this passion, teaching him woodworking skills and showing him how to create tools for farming and crafting. Together, they built birdhouses, repaired fences, and even constructed a small playhouse for Elias and his friends. The U.S. boys' laughter filled the air, a reminder of how far they had come since those dark days when his survival had seemed uncertain. Yet even as life moved forward, Elias never forgot his roots. Every evening, he visited Elena's grave, sitting quietly beneath the ancient oak tree and talking to her as if she were right there beside him. Sometimes he told her about his day, how he'd learned to count to 20, or how he'd made a new friend at the festival. Other times he simply sat in silence, listening to the rustling leaves and imagining her voice in the breeze. Clara often watched from a distance, tears brimming in her eyes as she marveled at the bond her nephew shared with a mother he barely remembered. On one such evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across the graveyard, Elias noticed something unusual etched into the bark of the oak tree. He ran his fingers over the carving, tracing the letters carefully. "Clara!" he called out, excitement bubbling in his voice. "Look what I found!" Clara hurried over, her breath catching in her throat as she read the single word carved into the wood: "Forgiven." Tears streamed down her face as she pulled Elias into a tight embrace. In that moment, she understood the depth of Elena's sacrifice and the lessons her story had taught everyone. Forgiveness wasn't just for others, it was also for oneself. And though Elena was gone, her legacy lived on through Elias, whose very existence reminded the village of the strength found in compassion, unity, and hope. The years ahead promised challenges, as they always did. But Clara faced them with confidence, knowing she wasn't alone. With Elias by her side, supported by Gabriel, Marta, and the entire village, she believed anything was possible. Together they would continue to build a brighter future, one rooted in love, resilience, and the enduring power of family. As Elias grew from a curious child into a thoughtful young man, the village continued to evolve alongside him. The once stagnant community had become a vibrant tapestry of old and new traditions, stitched together by shared experiences and mutual respect. What had started as whispers of dissent against rigid customs had blossomed into an open dialogue about what truly mattered: compassion, unity, and the courage to embrace change without losing sight of one's roots. And at the heart of this transformation was Elias, a living reminder that even in the darkest moments light could shine through. By the time Elias reached his teenage years, he had developed a deep appreciation for the land, its people, and the stories that bound them together. Clara often marveled at how much he resembled Elena, not just in appearance but in spirit. Like his mother, Elias possessed a natural warmth that drew people to him. He listened intently when others spoke, asked thoughtful questions, and offered help whenever it was needed. Whether it was mending a broken fence for an elderly neighbor, or teaching younger children how to identify medicinal herbs, Elias carried himself with a quiet confidence that inspired those around him. Gabriel remained a steadfast presence in Elias's life, mentoring him not only in practical skills like woodworking and farming, but also in matters of the heart. "Life is about balance," Gabriel often told him during their long walks through the forest. "You honor your past, but you don't let it weigh you down. You dream big, but you stay grounded. And above all, you treat others with kindness, because we're all connected in ways we may never fully understand." Elias absorbed these lessons eagerly, applying them to every aspect of his life. One summer, he took it upon himself to restore the ancient oak tree that stood over Elena's grave. Years of weather and neglect had left its bark scarred and brittle, but Elias refused to see it as anything less than a symbol of strength and resilience. With Gabriel's guidance, he carefully trimmed dead branches, patched wounds in the trunk, and planted wildflowers around its base. When the work was complete, the tree looked healthier than it had in decades, standing tall and proud under the open sky. Villagers began gathering beneath its shade again, sharing meals, stories, and laughter, a testament to how far they had come since the days when fear kept them away. Marta, now well into her later years, watched Elias with pride. Though her body had grown frail, her mind remained sharp, and she delighted in seeing the boy she had helped raise grow into such a remarkable young man. She often recounted tales of Elena's childhood, painting vivid pictures of her mischievous antics and boundless generosity. "Your mother would be so proud of you," Marta told Elias one evening as they sat by the fire. Her voice quivered slightly, but her eyes sparkled with affection. "She always believed in doing what was right, even when it was hard. That same fire burns in you." Elias nodded, his gaze fixed on the flickering flames. Though he barely remembered Elena, he felt her presence everywhere. In the kindness of Clara's embrace, in the wisdom of Marta's words, and in the resilience of the villagers who had learned to balance tradition with humanity. He visited her grave often, leaving flowers, and speaking aloud as if sharing secrets with her. Sometimes he imagined her smiling down at him, urging him to keep moving forward no matter the obstacles. The carving on the oak tree, "Forgiven," remained a source of reflection for Elias. To him, it represented not only forgiveness between people but also within oneself. He understood that Clara had carried guilt for years after her argument with Elena, just as many villagers had struggled with regret over abandoning him as a baby. But through love, patience, and understanding, they had found a way to heal, not erasing the past but learning from it. This lesson shaped Elias's worldview, teaching him to approach challenges with empathy rather than judgment. When Elias turned 18, the village held a special celebration in his honor. It wasn't a birthday party in the traditional sense, but rather a ceremony marking his transition into adulthood. Villagers gathered in the square, decorating it with garlands of flowers and hanging lanterns that glowed softly in the twilight. Music filled the air as musicians played instruments crafted by Gabriel, while dancers moved gracefully to the rhythm of drums. At the center of it all stood Elias, surrounded by the people who had shaped his journey. Clara gave a heartfelt speech, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "Elena trusted us to care for her son," she said, looking at Elias with unmistakable pride. "And though we stumbled along the way, we found our way back to what truly matters: love, hope, and the belief that every life deserves a chance." Today we celebrate not just Elias's coming of age, but the strength of a community that chose to rise above fear and embrace compassion. The crowd erupted in applause, cheering for Elias and for the future he represented. As the night wore on, Elias wandered to the edge of the gathering, drawn once more to the ancient oak tree. Beneath its sprawling branches he found Clara waiting for him, holding a small wooden box intricately carved with patterns resembling leaves and vines. Inside was a letter written by Elena years ago, addressed to Clara but never sent. Clara had discovered it among Elena's belongings after returning to the village and had kept it safe all these years, knowing the time would come to share it with Elias. "Read it," Clara urged gently, placing the letter in his hands. Elias unfolded the paper, his fingers trembling slightly as he scanned the familiar handwriting. In the letter, Elena spoke of her hopes and dreams, not just for herself but for her family and the village. She wrote of her desire to see Clara happy, of her belief in the goodness of people, and of her wish for a world where love triumphed over fear. The final lines brought tears to Elias's eyes. "No matter what happens, know that I forgive you, and that I will always love you." For a long moment, Elias simply stood there, the weight of the letter heavy in his hands. Then, without a word, he hugged Clara tightly, holding her as if afraid to let go. When he finally pulled away, his expression was resolute. "I'll make sure everyone remembers her," he said firmly. "Not just as my mother, but as someone who taught us all how to be better, to be kinder." In the years that followed, Elias became a bridge between generations, honoring Elena's memory by fostering connections within the community. He organized workshops where elders passed down their knowledge to younger villagers, ensuring that valuable traditions were preserved while making room for innovation. He encouraged storytelling sessions where people shared personal struggles and victories, creating a culture of openness and support. And he tended to the ancient oak tree, ensuring it remained a symbol of unity and growth. Though the village still faced challenges, economic hardships, disagreements, and moments of doubt, it faced them together, drawing strength from the bonds they had forged. Clara, Gabriel, Marta, and countless others watched proudly as Elias stepped into leadership roles, guiding the community with wisdom beyond his years. Yet he never forgot his roots. Every evening he returned to the oak tree, sitting quietly beneath its branches and listening to the rustling leaves as if hearing Elena's voice in the wind. One crisp autumn morning, as golden sunlight filtered through the trees, Elias noticed something new etched into the bark beside the original carving. Below "forgiven," someone had added another word: loved. Smiling softly, Elias traced the letters with his fingertips, feeling a profound sense of peace wash over him. He knew then that Elena's legacy would live on, not just in the stories told or the rituals observed, but in the hearts of everyone whose lives she had touched. And so the village thrived, its people united by a shared commitment to compassion and resilience. Through Elias, they remembered that even in the face of tragedy, hope could prevail. They learned that forgiveness wasn't just for others, it was also for oneself. And most importantly, they discovered that love, in all its forms, had the power to heal wounds, bridge divides, and create a brighter future for generations to come.